Ladies and gentlemen, there's a strange and comforting truth that sits quietly behind the noise of modern life. You were chosen before you were even conscious of yourself. Long before you ever achieved anything worth noting, before you ever proved your capability to anyone, least of all yourself, you were already known, already seen, already set apart. This isn't merely a poetic idea. It is a radical spiritual proposition that dismantles the illusion that your worth must be earned. Many of us spend years, even decades, trying to answer the question, "Why am I here?" And we mistakenly assume that the answer lies somewhere out there, in accolades, relationships, productivity, or clarity. But the sacred paradox is that your existence precedes your explanation. You don't need to understand your purpose in order for it to be real. In fact, purpose isn't something you stumble into by chance or hustle into by force. It's something you were born into. Imagine an author writing a story. The characters don't choose their roles. They are written into existence with a design already in place. They develop, yes, and they experience choice, tension, and transformation. But they never create themselves. Likewise, you did not summon your soul into being. You are not self-authored. You were chosen. And that chosenness has very little to do with your qualifications and everything to do with your origin. This is difficult for the modern mind to grasp. We have been raised in a culture that worships merit. We believe that anything of value must be earned through performance. So when we hear the idea that God chose us before we ever did anything of significance, we instinctively flinch. We ask, "But what have I done to deserve this?" The honest answer, nothing, and that is precisely the point. The worth of a thing is not proven by effort. It is established by design. From a psychological perspective, this touches something deep in us, our craving for unconditional worth. Every child longs to be loved simply for existing, not for being talented or attractive or obedient, but for being. Tragically, most of us grow up learning the opposite, that love is earned, that being seen is conditional, and that our value depends on staying useful. And so we grow up afraid of stillness, terrified of failure, and allergic to the idea of resting in who we are. But chosenness means you can stop auditioning for acceptance. You've already been cast. This does not mean you are exempt from discipline, struggle, or growth. It doesn't mean life will be easy or that you are more important than others. What it does mean is that your presence on this earth is not accidental. You are not a cosmic fluke. You are not merely a product of your parents' decisions or the sum of your trauma. You are a deliberate act of divine intention, and once that truth settles deep into the soil of your being, you begin to live differently. You no longer walk into rooms wondering if you belong. You no longer hustle to prove you're worthy of being chosen. You've already been chosen. Your only task now is to exist fully, mindfully, faithfully, to allow your life to unfold under the hand of the one who wrote your name before you even spoke a word. Now, you might ask, but if I've been chosen, why do I feel so lost? That is not an invalid question. It is, in fact, a sacred one. Being chosen doesn't mean being constantly confident. Even Jesus had a moment in Gethsemane where he cried out in anguish, questioning the weight of his assignment. So don't mistake your confusion for disqualification. Don't let temporary disorientation convince you that your identity is misplaced. God's choice is not threatened by your uncertainty. Just as a seed contains the entire blueprint of the tree before a single leaf appears, so too does your life carry the imprint of a purpose that may not yet be visible. But that doesn't mean it's not growing. You were chosen before the evidence of your calling could be seen. Your job is not to force the outcome, but to remain rooted. Let this truth do what years of striving could never achieve. Let it calm you. Let it correct the voice in your head that says you're not enough. Let it challenge the culture that demands constant validation. You were not chosen because you were ready. You were chosen because he was. And that is more than enough. So the next time you doubt your value, remember this. Your very breath is proof that God still wants you here. You don't need to be spectacular. You just need to exist. The rest is in His hands. There's a kind of silent pressure that begins to form once a person realizes they've been chosen for something greater. It creeps in quietly, often dressed as responsibility, disguised as urgency. You begin to feel like everything depends on you, your consistency, your energy, your ability to figure things out. The idea of being called starts to feel more like a burden than a blessing. You carry it like a fragile relic, terrified that if you falter, the whole divine plan might collapse. And in doing so, you forget something crucial. The weight of your purpose was never yours to carry alone. This is one of the most cunning illusions of modern spirituality, that the calling of God is like a contract of expectations. That you must be perpetually strong, perpetually clear, perpetually productive. But the truth is, God does not draft us into His purposes like employees into a corporation. He invites us as children into a relationship. He does not require our perfection. He only asks for our presence. If you study the lives of the so-called chosen ones throughout Scripture and history, you'll notice a consistent pattern. They were not people of endless strength. They were often people of profound weakness. Moses stuttered. Elijah collapsed under depression. Jeremiah wept constantly. Mary had no societal power, and yet they moved mountains, not by their might, but by their obedience, not by pushing through in their own strength, but by yielding to something larger than themselves. The burden was never theirs to carry. It was God's from the beginning. This is where we must shift our perspective. To be chosen is not to be overburdened. It is to be partnered. The divine is not watching from a distance, assessing your performance like a cosmic evaluator. He walks with you. In fact, He walks ahead of you. The outcomes you worry about are already accounted for. The battles you feel unprepared to fight are already factored into His plan. Yet we resist this truth. Why? Because there's something in the human psyche that equates control with safety. If we can orchestrate every detail, we feel protected. If we can predict the outcome, we feel powerful. But real purpose, divine purpose, requires surrender. It requires you to relinquish the illusion that you are the architect of your own success. That's not an insult to your intelligence or ability. It's a liberation of your soul. This kind of surrender is not passivity. It is not inaction or laziness or the avoidance of responsibility. It is a deeper kind of engagement, one rooted not in striving but in trust. You still show up, you still work, you still commit, but you do so from a place of rest, not panic. You operate not from fear of failure, but from confidence in divine provision, and that distinction changes everything. From a psychological standpoint, this shift is monumental. The human nervous system was not designed for chronic stress and pressure. Constant hypervigilance damages the body, erodes the mind, and distorts our perception of reality. When we believe everything depends on us, we begin to live in a perpetual state of tension. But when we believe God is ultimately responsible, we can breathe. We can focus. We can even enjoy the process. This is why some of the most effective people in history, the ones who created change, who moved societies, who bore great responsibilities, often spoke about peace, stillness, and clarity. They understood the difference between carrying something and being carried by something greater. The chosen are not those who force the door open. They are those who walk through it when it opens, prepared not by panic, but by trust. It's counterintuitive, of course. We want formulas. We want to earn our way, prove our readiness, predict our reward. But God's ways are not ours. His math does not always add up to our logic. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is rest. Sometimes The most powerful act of faith is to stop striving and just be present. And that's the point of it all, isn't it? To exist, to breathe, to trust that the one who called you is also sustaining you. You were not meant to live in exhaustion. You were meant to live in alignment, and alignment is not achieved through endless effort, but through surrender. So, if you've been feeling overwhelmed by the weight of your purpose, pause. Take your hands off the wheel. Remember that the one who chose you has also committed to carry what you cannot. You are not the glue holding everything together. You are the vessel being held. You were never asked to carry the whole thing, only to show up. And in showing up, you make room for God to do what only He can. It's a peculiar thing, being chosen and yet feeling invisible. There are moments in lifelong stretches sometimes where nothing seems to be happening. No doors open, no applause sounds, no breakthroughs arrive. You wake, you work, you wait, and in the silence a question begins to form, not with words, but with weariness. If I'm chosen, why does no one see me? This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of divine purpose. We imagine that being chosen should mean being visible, that once called we ought to be launched, publicly affirmed, externally celebrated, immediately activated. But that is not the pattern of divine preparation. On the contrary, God's work almost always begins in hiddenness. Think about it. Before David faced Goliath, he was alone in the fields, defending sheep from lions and bears, with no audience to witness his courage. Before Moses stood before Pharaoh, he spent 40 years in the wilderness, stripped of status, learning to shepherd. Even Christ himself, the most chosen of all, spent 30 years in near total obscurity, working in a carpenter's shop in Nazareth, with no miracles, no sermons, no spectacle. Just silence, just existence. The hidden years are not wasted. They are sacred. They are, in fact, essential, because visibility is not maturity. Applause is not anointing. And to be seen too soon can be more dangerous than to be seen too late. The soul needs space to deepen before it can withstand the pressures of public assignment. And so God, in His wisdom, hides the chosen for their protection, for their formation, for their transformation. There's a beautiful tension here, and it must be acknowledged. We live in a culture obsessed with exposure. Social media, branding, public metrics. We are conditioned to believe that what is not seen does not matter. That if no one is watching, we must be failing, but the soul does not grow in the spotlight. It grows in the soil, in the quiet, in the places no one claps for. To be unseen by people is not to be forgotten by God. In fact, invisibility is often the signature of divine intimacy. It is in the hidden spaces that God whispers things too holy for the crowd. It is in the silence that He stretches your character, your discernment, your endurance. He is not punishing you with delay. He is preparing you for wait. And when the time comes, when the doors open and the moment arrives, you will not crumble under the pressure, because your roots were grown deep in the soil of hiddenness. Psychologically, this hidden season can feel like rejection. It can feel like stagnation, but feelings are not always facts. Just as a seed buried in the earth may appear to be dormant, what's happening beneath the surface is explosive, roots pushing, cells multiplying, life forming. The problem is not inactivity, it's that the growth is invisible to the eye, but the wise gardener never doubts what's happening underground. He knows the process is working, even if he can't yet see the fruit. So too must we trust that our becoming is not contingent on being noticed. The soul doesn't need a stage to be significant. It needs depth. It needs resilience, and these are not developed in the limelight. They are developed in obscurity. Now, this doesn't mean you shouldn't move or act or dream. It doesn't mean you resign yourself to a passive existence. It means you stop equating visibility with value. It means you cease measuring your worth by how many are watching. Some of the most meaningful work you'll ever do will happen in rooms where no one is looking. Some of your greatest contributions may never be recognized publicly. And that's not a failure. That's faithfulness. Faithfulness is what matters. That quiet, consistent commitment to showing up, to growing where you're planted, to becoming in silence what you hope to reveal in daylight. That is the mark of the truly chosen. Not the flash, not the fame, but the quiet integrity of a life lived before the eyes of God, even when the world isn't paying attention. So if you're in a season where it feels like nothing is happening, where your prayers echo back in silence, where your gifts remain unopened, do not despair. The God who called you has not forgotten you. He is not delayed, he is deliberate. The hidden years are not the absence of purpose. They are the slow unfolding of it. Don't despise the silence. God does his deepest work in the dark, and when the time is right, what was once invisible will become undeniable. It is one of the most unsettling ironies of life. The moment you begin to step into who you truly are, when you finally accept that you are chosen, when you surrender to your calling, when you dare to walk in quiet obedience, you often meet resistance, not relief. You'd think alignment with divine purpose would create a smooth path. You'd think that choosing light would make the darkness retreat, but instead everything seems to push back. Friends become distant. Circumstances unravel. Your confidence flickers. And somewhere in the confusion, a question rises. If I'm truly walking in purpose, why does it feel like everything is falling apart? The answer, though difficult to accept, is rooted in something deeply spiritual and profoundly psychological. Resistance is not always a sign that you're off track. In fact, more often than not, it's a confirmation that you're exactly where you're meant to be. We tend to think of resistance as something we must avoid, proof of misalignment, a signal to stop. But in the realm of the sacred, resistance is often a revealing force. It exposes what lies beneath the surface, fears that were buried, insecurities we didn't know we had, lies we've quietly believed, and in doing so, it purifies the path ahead. You cannot carry contamination into calling. The pressure you face is not an indictment against you. It's the fire that burns away what doesn't belong. If you look at every major figure in Scripture and in history who was called to something significant, their lives were punctuated by opposition. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers and imprisoned for doing the right thing. Esther risked her life to speak truth to power. Paul faced beatings, rejection, shipwrecks, and constant danger. And Jesus, perfect, sinless, divine, was misunderstood, falsely accused, and ultimately crucified. So, let us disabuse ourselves of the idea that being chosen means being protected from pain. On the contrary, being chosen invites opposition precisely because your presence threatens the systems that profit from your silence. Darkness does not fight what does not challenge it. The enemy does not waste energy on what poses no threat. The weight you feel, the resistance you face, it's evidence, not of failure, but of significance. From a psychological perspective, resistance is also the sign of growth. Ask anyone who's ever healed from trauma, broken a cycle, or pursued a path of transformation. The brain itself resists change. It clings to what is familiar, even if that familiarity is dysfunctional, because it perceives safety in predictability. So the moment you begin to shift, to step into new patterns, your entire system protests. Emotionally, physically, spiritually, there is tension, but that tension is the stretching of the soul. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's essential, and here's something we must understand. Comfort is not the goal of the chosen. Comfort is not evil, but it is often the enemy of growth. The chosen are not called to ease, they are called to impact, and impact by its nature disrupts, it stirs, it unsettles. You cannot shift atmospheres and expect to remain untouched, but you can remain unshaken. And how do you remain unshaken? Not by being impervious to pain, but by recognizing it for what it is, the echo of your calling, not the negation of it. The one who is chosen must come to terms with the fact that favor and fire often coexist, that you can be in alignment and still be under attack, that God's presence does not always prevent the storm, but it always outlasts it. So when the resistance comes, and it will come, don't waste your strength asking, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, ask, "What is this resistance confirming in me? What is this struggle refining? What lie is being challenged? What strength is being built? You are not being undone. You are being deepened. The world will not always applaud your calling. It may mock it, misunderstand it, or oppose it outright. But your value is not up for debate, and your purpose does not require consensus. Some rooms will reject you simply because your presence convicts what they've grown comfortable tolerating. That is not your problem to fix, that is your signal to press on. So let the resistance come. Let it stretch you, teach you, and if needed, strip you. But do not let it stop you. The one who called you has already accounted for every obstacle. You are never meant to fight every battle, only to stand firm, knowing the battle is not yours to win, but God's to finish. Opposition is not proof that you've taken a wrong turn. Sometimes it's the clearest sign you've finally started walking in the right direction. There is a subtle but dangerous belief that creeps into the heart of those who feel chosen, that everything now hinges on their ability to succeed, that they must now deliver, that outcomes depend on their precision, their decisions, their energy. It's an understandable response. After all, to be called by God feels weighty, sacred. The stakes feel higher. You want to get it right. But here's the paradox. The more we cling to control, the further we drift from the very faith that called us in the first place. Control is comforting. It gives the illusion of safety. If we can manage the outcome, if we can predict the path, then perhaps we can avoid disappointment. But the walk of the chosen is not a path of control. It is a path of trust. And trust, by its very nature, demands the release of control. It demands surrender, not of responsibility, but of the outcome. You are not required to know where every step leads. You are only required to take the next one. That may sound passive to some, but it is far from it. True trust is not laziness. It is the most courageous form of obedience. It says, "I will keep moving, not because I see how it ends, but because I trust the one who does." Faith does not begin where things are clear. It begins where clarity ends and obedience begins. That is where the chosen live in the tension between mystery and movement. You see, the need to control is not rooted in strength. It's rooted in fear. We are afraid of loss, afraid of failure, afraid that if we're not constantly managing everything, everything will collapse. But when you believe that you are the author of the story, you take on a burden you were never meant to carry. God never asked you to be the architect of results. He asked you to be faithful in what He's placed in front of you, just that, nothing more. This doesn't mean you abandon planning or excellence. It means you do those things from a posture of surrender, not anxiety. You steward, but you don't cling. You prepare, but you don't panic. There is a difference between being diligent and being desperate. The first is peaceful. The second is exhausting. The chosen must learn this distinction, or they will burn out trying to force open doors God never asked them to open. Think about how much energy we waste trying to manipulate outcomes. We overthink every decision. We run scenarios through our minds at night, trying to solve problems that aren't ours to solve. We interpret every delay as a failure and every silence as a denial. But often, the delay is a gift. The silence is an invitation. And the closed door is a redirection, not a rejection. God is not cruel in his withholding. He's wise in his timing. From a psychological perspective, this release of outcome is freeing. Human beings function best not under the weight of pressure, but under the clarity of purpose. When you believe the outcome is God's, your mind is free to focus on the present, on the task at hand, on doing the next right thing. You are less reactive, more grounded. You stop living in imaginary futures and start engaging in real-time faith. And in that space, you make better decisions, not driven by fear, but rooted in peace. Even in the natural world, we see this pattern. A farmer does not grow crops by staring anxiously at the field, willing the seed to sprout faster. He plants, he waters, and he waits, because he knows the outcome is not in his control, but his surrender does not make him passive, it makes him wise. He does his part, and he lets nature, designed by God, do the rest. So it is with your life. You are not called to obsess over the harvest. You are called to sow in faith. Every act of obedience is a seed. Every moment of trust is water, and the growth will come, not because you forced it, but because God is faithful. He always has been, so let go of the outcome. Let go of the need to know, to control, to guarantee. That's not your job. Your job is to listen, to respond, to trust. And when you do, you'll find a strength that striving could never produce, a strength rooted not in your will, but in God's unfailing hand. You don't need to know the ending to walk with confidence. You just need to know the one who writes the story. Let him handle the rest. One of the most persistent lies we've been conditioned to believe is that being chosen means being perfect, that to carry something sacred you must be flawless, that you must never fail, never falter, never reveal weakness. But this belief is not only spiritually toxic, it's psychologically paralyzing. It convinces people to disqualify themselves from what they were never meant to earn in the first place. They begin to edit themselves down to something manageable, digestible, acceptable, and in doing so, they lose the very essence of what made them chosen. Perfection has never been a prerequisite for divine purpose. In fact, God seems to go out of his way to choose those who are cracked, uncertain, unpolished. Think of Peter, impulsive and inconsistent, or Paul, who once hunted the very people he would later lead. The Bible is not a book of pristine saints. It's a record of deeply human, deeply flawed individuals who chose to show up despite their limitations. That's the thread that binds them, not perfection, but presence. There is a myth, quiet but persistent, that says you must fix yourself before you can be used. But this is the opposite of how God works. The invitation has never been, "Come perfect." It has always been, "Come willing." The work of transformation does not happen before the calling. It happens alongside it. God does not wait until you've resolved every trauma, healed every wound, conquered every fear. He works through the raw material of your current self. Not the self you wish you were, the self you are right now. And this is not to say growth doesn't matter. It absolutely does. But growth does not precede calling. It flows from it. You are shaped in the doing, formed in the going, refined in the trusting. The very act of walking with God chisels away what is false and strengthens what is true. So don't wait to be flawless. You will wait your entire life and never move an inch. From a psychological lens, this pressure toward perfection often leads to paralysis. The fear of being not enough causes people to avoid risk, to procrastinate purpose, to retreat from opportunity. They wait for confidence before they act. But confidence doesn't come first, obedience does. It is in the act of showing up that confidence is built. It is in the act of saying yes, even with shaking hands, that clarity begins to unfold. The courage doesn't precede the step, it follows it. You were not chosen for your polish. You were chosen for your posture. God is not scanning the world for the most put-together people. He is looking for those willing to be available. That means your past does not disqualify you. Your current confusion does not exclude you. Even your fear is not a deal breaker. As long as you are present, as long as your heart is open, you are exactly where you need to be. Think of how freeing that is, to realize you don't have to carry the illusion anymore. You don't have to perform holiness or wear spiritual competence like a mask. You get to be honest, you get to be real, and that authenticity becomes the place where grace meets you most deeply. You are not a project to be completed before you're permitted to serve. You are a vessel, already valuable, already chosen, already enough. There's something profoundly beautiful about being used by God while still being in process. It reminds you, and everyone watching, that this was never about your greatness. It was always about His. That the cracks in your life don't discredit the message. They amplify it, because light shines brightest through broken places. And isn't that what the world needs more than ever? Not perfect examples, but honest ones. Not unreachable saints, but real, vulnerable humans who show up in spite of fear, who choose to walk when it would be easier to hide. Your imperfections don't make you unqualified. They make you relatable. And relatability is often the gateway to transformation. People don't need your perfection. They need your presence. So if you've been waiting for the perfect version of yourself to arrive before stepping into what God is calling you to do, stop waiting. That version doesn't exist, and it was never required. You are not chosen because you've arrived. You are chosen so that, through your journey, others might begin theirs. God does not need your perfection, only your permission. Just exist. Just show up. He'll handle the rest.